The steel bars caught the fluorescent light in sharp, clinical angles, casting shadows across concrete floors that had been hosed down so many times the surface had worn smooth as glass. In the fourth cage from the left, a creature who had never been given anything more than a number, subject 247, lay curled on her side, her breathing shallow and labored. Around her, men in expensive suits held champagne flutes in one hand and betting slips in the other, their voices rising and falling like the tide as they wagered on how long it would take, whether the offspring would survive, what traits it might display. This was how it had always been in the facility. The breeding program had operated for decades in the shadows of legality, in that gray space where money and influence could bend the rules until they snapped. Subject 247 had known nothing else. She had been born here, second generation, raised in a cage barely large enough for her to stand fully upright. Her mother had been Subject 189, though she had never known that. Numbers were assigned at birth, stamped onto metal tags that hung from collars, recorded in ledgers that tracked lineage like livestock pedigrees. The men pressed closer to the bars now, their excitement palpable. Someone had bet 5,000 on delivery within the hour. Another had wagered twice that on complications. Subject 247's eyes, dark and liquid with pain, moved across their faces without comprehension. She had learned long ago that humans fell into two categories: those who brought food and those who brought pain. These were neither, but their presence meant something was happening, something that made her body convulse with sensations she had no framework to understand. Marcus Chen had been working at the facility for 3 weeks. He had taken the job as a night janitor because it was the only thing available after his factory closed, because his daughter needed medicine that insurance wouldn't cover, because the bills kept coming and coming like waves that would drown him if he stopped swimming. They had told him to mop floors, empty trash, and ask no questions. The pay was triple what he should have made for pushing a mop, and that alone should have told him something was wrong. But desperation has a way of making people blind. For 3 weeks, he had mopped around cages, averted his eyes from their inhabitants, and told himself that whatever happened here was none of his business. He had perfected the art of not seeing, of letting his vision blur and his mind drift to grocery lists and medication schedules and his daughter's laugh when she was feeling well enough to laugh. Tonight, though, the crowd in the breeding wing made not seeing impossible. Marcus pushed his mop bucket past the gathered men, trying to become invisible the way he had learned to do, but the sound that came from the cage stopped him cold. It was a sound that bypassed his conscious mind and spoke directly to something more primitive, something that recognized suffering when it heard it regardless of species. He looked up despite himself, and his eyes met those of Subject 247. Later, he would struggle to explain what happened in that moment. He would tell his daughter that it was like seeing someone drowning and realizing you were the only person with a life preserver. He would tell the lawyers that he had simply been following his conscience. But in the moment itself, there were no words, only the sudden, crystal-clear understanding that he was watching something unforgivable and that his complicity, even passive complicity, made him part of it. The men didn't notice when he slipped away from his mop bucket. They were too absorbed in their spectacle, in the perverse entertainment of watching life struggle into existence in conditions designed to strip away every shred of dignity. Marcus moved through the facility with purpose now, no longer the invisible janitor but someone on a mission. He knew where they kept the keys. He had seen them often enough in his careful not seeing. He knew where the exits were, which cameras had blind spots, when the guards took their smoke breaks. His hands shook as he grabbed the keys. This was it, the point of no return. He thought of his daughter, of how this would end his job, possibly end his freedom if they caught him. But he thought too of those eyes looking at him, and how he would have to explain to himself every day after this why he had walked away. Some prices were too high to pay, even for medicine, even for security. The men scattered when he walked back into the breeding wing with bolt cutters. Someone shouted. Someone else grabbed for his arm. Marcus was a big man, made strong by years of manual labor, and he shrugged them off like cobwebs. The bolt cutters made short work of the padlock they had installed as an extra measure on the cage. As if the bars themselves weren't enough, as if their captive could have picked a lock in her condition. Subject 247 barely moved when the cage door swung open. She watched him with those same dark eyes, but now they held a question. Marcus had no time to coax or persuade. Security would be coming. The police would be coming. He reached in and gathered her carefully, shocked at how light she was, how fragile despite her size. She made a sound, not quite protest, not quite acceptance, and he realized that trust was something she had never learned. The offspring came during the drive. Marcus had thrown a blanket over her in the back of his ancient pickup truck, had pointed it toward the mountains where he knew there were people who helped in situations like this, though he had never imagined he would be one of those situations. He pulled over when he heard her cries intensify, into a rest-stop bathroom that reeked of bleach and broken promises, and he helped the way he had helped when his own daughter was born, with shaking hands and whispered encouragement and a certainty that this was what it meant to be human. She gave birth on cracked linoleum under harsh LED lights, a far cry from the cage, but still not the soft nest of leaves and earth that her kind had evolved to seek out. But it was private. There were no men placing bets, no champagne glasses catching the light, no ledgers recording data points. There was only Marcus, murmuring words she couldn't understand but responding to nonetheless, and the overwhelming work of bringing life into the world. When it was done, when the offspring lay curled and breathing against her, Marcus sat back against the bathroom wall and wept. He wept for his daughter, for this creature, for all the ways the world could be cruel and all the small, inadequate ways people tried to push back against that cruelty. Then he pulled himself together, helped her back to the truck, and continued driving. The sanctuary in the mountains took them in without questions, at least not at first. They had seen rescues before, though rarely this dramatic, rarely this fraught with legal consequences. Marcus stayed only long enough to make sure she was settled, to watch the sanctuary workers examine her with gentle hands and worried faces, cataloging years of inadequate nutrition and psychological trauma along with the physical toll of birth. Before he left, one of the workers asked him if he knew her name. Marcus shook his head, then paused. He had seen her file, briefly, when he took the keys. She was subject 247. She had never been anything else. He thought about his daughter's name, Grace, and how much weight a name could carry, how it could transform a thing into a someone. Maya, he said, surprising himself. It had been his grandmother's name, a woman who had hidden refugees during a war on the other side of the world, who had understood about lines you couldn't uncross. Her name is Maya. The worker wrote it down. Subject 247 ceased to exist in that moment, and Maya, just Maya, looked up from where she rested with her offspring. Whether she understood the significance of the sound, whether it registered as belonging to her, was impossible to say. But something in her posture shifted slightly, a subtle relaxation, as if some fundamental equation of the universe had been corrected. Marcus drove back down the mountain as dawn broke over the valley. He knew what was coming: arrest, charges, lawyers he couldn't afford. The facility would prosecute to make an example. The men who had been placing bets would fade into the background, protected by money and connections, while the janitor who broke the cage would face the consequences. His daughter would ask questions he didn't know how to answer. His life, already precarious, would become more so. But as he watched the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, Marcus found he could breathe deeper than he had in weeks. There was a cage that would sit empty now. There was a creature who had a name instead of a number. There was new life that would know something other than bars and concrete. In the grand scheme of suffering, he had barely made a dent. But he had made a dent. Sometimes that was all you could do. See the drowning person. Throw the life preserver. Let the consequences come.